The land was a vast, brown sea of dust and grass, baked pale by a sun that showed no kindness. It was a lonely kingdom, and at its heart stood a ranch of weathered wood and stubborn stone, as hard and silent as the man who owned it. This man was Cole, and his name was whispered in the towns and travel posts with a mix of envy and caution. He was rich in cattle and in land, but it was said his heart was a stone, locked away behind a gate as surely as the one that marked the entrance to his property. For Cole had a peculiar and famous habit: he refused every bride who sought him out. They came in carriages and on fine horses, women with hopeful smiles and ambitious fathers, but not one had ever passed through that gate to stay. He would meet them there, a cold figure on his horse, his eyes as distant as the horizon, and with a few sharp words, he would turn them away. The gate, both real and a symbol of his closed heart, always swung shut. The reason for this was a ghost from a past that Cole never spoke of. Long ago, when he was younger and softer, he had trusted someone, and that trust had been broken in a way that carved all the warmth out of him. He decided then that solitude was safer than betrayal, that a lonely ranch was better than a crowded heart. He built walls around himself as strong as any made of timber and iron. His foreman, an older man named Mr. Abernathy, watched this with a sad heart, remembering the boy Cole had once been before he built his fortress of pride and pain. One afternoon, when the heat made the air shimmer, a different kind of figure appeared on the road. She did not ride in a carriage, nor did she sit tall on a saddle. She walked, her boots coated in the dust of a long journey. This was Elara. Her dress was simple and worn thin at the edges, and her hair was tied back without any fuss or ribbon. Her story was one of quiet sorrows, a family lost, a home gone, but her eyes, a calm and steady shade of gray, held not despair, but a deep and unyielding resilience. She had nothing left but the hope that somewhere, she could find a place to belong, to work, and to be safe. She reached the famous gate and stopped, her hand resting lightly on the sun-warmed wood. She did not call out or demand entry. She simply waited, a picture of patient stillness in the vast, noisy landscape of wind and grass. It was not long before the sound of hoofbeats approached, and Cole appeared on his great horse, his expression already set in its familiar, unwelcoming lines. He looked down at this quiet, dusty creature, expecting the usual pleas or proud declarations. He prepared to send her away, to add her to the long list of refusals. But Elara did not plead. She looked up at him, meeting his cold gaze without fear or flattery. When he told her there was no place for her here, that she should turn around and leave, she did not argue. Instead, in a voice that was soft but clear, like water over smooth stones, she said, "I am a hard worker. I ask only for a chance to prove it." The words were simple, but they were true. They held no greed, no scheme, only an honest offer of labor. Something in her calm resilience, so different from all the others, gave Cole a moment of pause. His planned refusal stuck in his throat. Suspicion warred with a strange, faint curiosity. With a grunt that was neither kind nor cruel, he finally spoke, his voice rough. "1 week," he said. "You can work in the kitchen. A trial. Nothing more." He turned his horse, the gate was open just enough for her to pass through, and Elara stepped into his world, not as a bride, but as a question mark. The following sunrise found Elara already at work, not with the loud clatter of someone trying to prove a point, but with the quiet hum of someone who knew the rhythm of labor. The main ranch house was a cavernous place, filled with the ghosts of silence and the dust of neglect. Cole had expected, perhaps, that she would seek him out, to ask for finer things or to make her presence known with chatter. Instead, she seemed to blend into the woodwork, a gentle shadow that somehow made the light brighter. She found her way to the kitchen, where the cook, a surly man named Jed, initially scowled at her intrusion. But Elara did not wait for orders. She saw a pile of potatoes needing peeling and set to work. She noticed the dusty shelves and found a cloth to wipe them clean. She moved with an efficient grace that was its own kind of language, one of usefulness and care. Her influence began to seep into the corners of the ranch like a gentle rain after a long drought. Cole, from his study window or from the back of his horse as he rode out to check the herds, would catch glimpses of her. He saw her sitting on the porch in the early morning, not idle, but mending a tear in a ranch hand's shirt with neat, sturdy stitches. He saw her leave a cool dipper of water on a fence post for the men returning from the far pastures. He noticed she had a way with the more skittish animals, speaking to them in tones so low they were almost a thought, calming a nervous horse with just her steady presence. One afternoon, Mr. Abernathy found Cole watching as Elara showed the youngest stable boy how to properly braid a rope, her hands moving over his with infinite patience. "She's a good soul, that one," the foreman said, his voice casual but his eyes knowing. "Doesn't ask for a thing. Just gives." Cole offered no reply, but the observation settled deep within him, a small, warm stone in the cold river of his feelings. The true shift happened in the old barn, a place Cole usually avoided for the memories it held. Drawn by an unusual sound, he stepped into the shadowy, hay-scented interior. There, in a stall filled with fresh straw, was Elara. A newborn calf, born too small and weak, lay shivering beside its weary mother. Elara was kneeling in the straw, not in a clean dress, but in her simple work clothes. She had a bottle of milk, and she was coaxing the tiny creature to drink, one slow drop at a time. Her voice was a soft, melodic whisper, a wordless lullaby meant only for the fragile life before her. She was not singing for an audience, she was pouring her own strength into the calf, her entire being focused on this one act of saving. Cole stood, hidden by the shadows, and watched. He saw the tenderness in her touch, the unwavering hope in her posture as she willed the creature to live. And in that moment, the fortress around his heart did not crumble with a great noise, but rather, a single, well-placed stone deep within its wall quietly loosened. A feeling, long forgotten and as warm as the summer sun, began to thaw a tiny part of the perpetual winter inside him. It was not yet love, but it was the end of pure solitude. It was the first, fragile seed of trust. The change in the weather was as sudden as the change that had begun in Cole's heart. The sky, which had been a vast, empty blue, swiftly curdled into a bruised purple-gray. A wind, sharp and foreboding, swept down from the distant mountains, whipping the tall grasses into a frenzy and slamming shutters against the sides of the house. The air itself grew heavy and charged, pressing down on the ranch with a palpable threat. The ranch hands, reading the signs with practiced eyes, scrambled to secure tools and herd the more vulnerable animals into the sturdy barns. Cole, his instincts as a rancher overriding all else, rode out into the growing gale to ensure the main herd was driven to higher ground, away from the danger of flash floods. It was in this chaos, amid the first great cracks of thunder, that a loose piece of corral timber, torn free by the wind's fury, struck him. It was not a killing blow, but it was a deep, angry gash on his arm that sent a blinding flash of pain through his body and left him bleeding heavily into the churning mud. He managed to stagger back to the house, his world narrowed to the fire in his arm and the drumming of the rain on the roof. He collapsed into a chair in his private study, a room as austere and lonely as the man himself, clutching his arm and gritting his teeth against the pain. He was a man who prided himself on his strength, on his ability to bear any burden alone, and his first thought was to simply endure it, to let the wound bind itself. But the quiet shadow that had moved through his house for days appeared in the doorway. Elara had seen him return, had seen the dark stain spreading on his sleeve. Without a word, she disappeared and returned moments later with a basin of clean water, strips of clean linen, and a small jar of salve she had found in the kitchen. Cole growled at her to leave, to tend to her own business, but she ignored him completely. Her calmness in the face of his stormy anger was a force in itself. She knelt beside his chair, and with a firmness that brooked no argument, she took his injured arm in her hands. Her touch was not that of a frightened girl, but sure and gentle. As she cleaned the grime and blood from the wound, her movements were precise and unhurried, a quiet harbor in the tempest that raged outside the window. The rain lashed against the panes, and the wind howled like a living thing, but in that room, there was only the soft sound of her breathing and the gentle splash of water. The pain began to recede, not just from the salve, but from the simple, profound comfort of being cared for. Cole, who had held himself so rigid for so long, felt the fight drain out of him. He watched the top of her head as she worked, saw the intense concentration on her face, and the walls he had spent years building seemed to melt in the face of such simple, unasked-for kindness. A strange warmth spread through him, starting from where her hand rested on his skin and moving inward, thawing places that had been frozen solid for a decade. And then, he began to talk. The words came slowly at first, rusty from disuse. He did not look at her, but stared into the fire dancing in the hearth, his voice a low rumble beneath the storm. He spoke of a time before the coldness, of a love he had given his whole heart to, a woman who had seen his wealth and not his soul, who had taken his trust and shattered it for a handful of silver before riding away forever. He spoke of the vow he had made then, to never again be such a fool, to never let anyone close enough to wield that kind of power over him. He laid the ghost of his past at her feet, this quiet woman who asked for nothing. When he finally fell silent, the confession hanging in the air between them, Elara finished tying the bandage. She looked up, and her gray eyes held no pity, which he would have hated, but a deep and understanding sorrow. She saw the boy he had been, hidden behind the scars of the man he had become. In that shared silence, something broke and something else was born. He reached out, his good hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her own hand coming to rest over his. When he leaned in and their lips met, it was not a kiss of fiery passion, but of a profound and healing connection. It was a silent promise, a bridge built across the chasm of his loneliness, a single, perfect answer to the question she had posed when she first stepped through his gate. Outside, the storm began to relent, its fury spent, leaving behind a world washed clean and the first, fragile stars glittering in a cleared sky. The days that followed the storm were of a kind the ranch had never known. A new and gentle light seemed to fall upon the land, softening the harsh edges of the landscape and warming the cold stones of the house. Cole was a man transformed, not into someone entirely new, but into the man he might have been had bitterness not taken root so deep. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes, and the ranch hands, who had known only his stern commands, found themselves working with a newfound lightness. He sought out Elara's company not as a master, but as an equal, walking with her through the pastures at dusk, pointing out the constellations that peppered the vast velvet sky. He listened to the few, soft words she offered, finding a world of meaning in her quiet observations. The love that had blossomed in the storm's aftermath was a tender, growing thing, nurtured by shared sunsets and the simple, profound peace of companionship. The future, once a bleak and lonely road, now stretched before them, bright with the promise of a shared life. This newfound peace, however, was a fragile vessel on a wide and unpredictable sea. Its shattering came on an ordinary afternoon, riding in on the back of a stranger's horse. The man was slick with the dust of travel and possessed a smile that did not touch his cold, calculating eyes. He asked for Cole by name, presenting himself as a distant acquaintance from a town many miles away, a place from Elara's past. Cole, his instincts dulled by happiness, invited the man in, his guard down. Seated in the study with a glass of whiskey, the stranger's tone grew conspiratorial. He spun a clever and venomous tale, painting a picture of Elara as a cunning adventuress, a woman who made a practice of finding lonely, wealthy men. He spoke of fabricated debts and secret plans, weaving a tapestry of lies so detailed and plausible that they began to find purchase in the fertile soil of Cole's old wounds. "She's playing a part, you see," the man whispered, his voice slick with false concern. "The quiet, hard-working girl? It's all an act. The moment you let your guard down completely, she'll take you for everything you have." The poison worked with a terrible, swift efficiency. The old Cole, the one who trusted no one, who expected betrayal around every corner, surged back to the surface, drowning the hopeful man he had so recently become. When the stranger was gone, Cole found Elara in the garden, harvesting late-season vegetables, her hands dark with rich soil. He did not ask for her side of the story. He did not look into her eyes to seek the truth he had so recently found there. Instead, he confronted her with the stranger's accusations, his voice a lash of cold fury, each word chosen to wound. He called her a deceiver and a trickster, throwing the lies back in her face and watching, with a sort of grim satisfaction, as the color drained from her cheeks. The hurt in her eyes was immediate and profound, a physical blow that made her take a step back. But it did not give way to the weeping or the pleading he expected. Instead, a deep, weary resilience straightened her spine. She looked at him, her gray eyes now pools of a sorrow so vast it seemed to silence the very birds in the trees. She did not shout her defense to the skies. In a voice that was low and steady, though it threatened to break with every word, she told him the true story of her past. It was a story of poverty, not of greed, of loss, not of cunning. She spoke of a family taken by fever, of a home lost to debt collectors, of a long and desperate journey taken not to find a rich man, but simply to find a place to belong, to work, and to be safe. "I came here for a home," she said, her final words falling like stones into the silence between them. "Not for your money. But a home cannot be built where there is no trust." She turned from him then, her movements slow and deliberate, and walked into the house to gather her few, meager belongings. She would not fight for a place where she was seen as a liar. She would not beg for a love that could be so easily shattered. As she prepared to walk back down the very road she had arrived on, the ranch, once so full of light, felt emptier and colder than it ever had before. The silence that settled over the ranch after Elara's departure was of a different quality than the solitude Cole had once cultivated. This new silence was heavy, accusatory, and filled with a profound emptiness that echoed in every room of the too-big house. The cheerful clatter from the kitchen ceased, the gentle hum of her presence was gone, and the very air felt stale and lifeless. Cole stood rigidly in his study, the ghost of her final words, "A home cannot be built where there is no trust," echoing in his mind, each repetition a hammer blow against his pride. The cold anger that had shielded him began to crack, and through the fissures poured a torrent of unbearable clarity. He saw not a scheming adventuress in his memory, but the woman who had mended his clothes, calmed his animals, and bandaged his wound with hands of infinite gentleness. He saw the honest sorrow in her eyes, not the guilt of a liar caught, but the heartbreak of someone betrayed. The stranger's lies, which had seemed so plausible in the heat of the moment, now revealed themselves as the flimsiest of deceptions, and he, Cole, had been the fool for believing them. He did not know how long he stood there, trapped in the prison of his own making, until the sound of a gentle cough broke the spell. Mr. Abernathy stood in the doorway, his old face etched with a disappointment that was far more painful than any anger. "I know it is not my place to say, sir," the foreman began, his voice quiet but firm, "but you have made a terrible mistake. That woman, her kindness was not an act. She saw the good man buried deep within you, and she was trying to help him find his way out. To send her away based on the words of a slick-tongued stranger, it's the worst thing you've ever done." The truth of the words, spoken with such simple conviction, shattered the last of Cole's defenses. The image of Elara walking alone on that dusty, dangerous road, her heart broken and her hope extinguished, became an agony he could not bear. A resolve, fiercer and more determined than any he had ever felt, ignited within him. He was not the cold, untouchable rancher. He was a man who had been given a second chance at life and love, and in his fear, he had thrown it away. He would not let it end this way. He moved with a purpose that was almost frantic, saddling his strongest horse with his own hands, his injured arm a dull throb he barely noticed. He did not bother with a hat or a coat. He simply rode, urging the horse into a gallop that ate up the miles, his eyes fixed on the horizon, searching for a single, solitary figure. The world around him was a blur of brown and green, his entire being was focused on one thing, finding her.